What would you do if you were aboard a private jet and the pilot suddenly became incapacitated? How could you handle the emergency and ultimately secure safe rescue? The film we're introducing today is adapted from a real-life case. The story is set in New Jersey, where a small plane soars through the sky. The man at the helm is John, with his brother George seated behind him. Judging from his expression, John appears to be a novice. In fact, he's not a pilot at all, just trying out a recreational flying activity. Seated next to him is his instructor for this endeavor. Flying a plane, unlike driving a car, requires a strong sense of balance, a quality that John clearly lacks. His first attempt at piloting is quite poor, but he manages to land safely under the guidance of his instructor. Following this experience, John comes to a conclusion: he never wants to fly a plane again in his life. He then joins his brother in a local culinary competition. It turns out that the flying experience was George's idea, not wanting his brother, who'd come from afar, to miss out on this popular local activity. After the food event, the family prepares to return home. Initially, they plan to take a commercial flight, but with a considerable amount of luggage, the check-in process would be quite bothersome. Hence, they opt for a private plane. There's another reason, too. John wants to savor the sensation of flying a plane once more. The chief pilot for this trip is Sam. The family, laden with luggage, boards the plane, and John happily takes his place in the co-pilot's seat. Everything seems to go smoothly at first. After a while, they are airborne, relishing their well-earned vacation. John even engages in friendly banter with pilot Sam. However, disaster strikes unexpectedly. John suddenly realizes that Sam has become eerily quiet. When he goes to check on him, a horrific scene unfolds. Sam has suffered a sudden cardiac arrest and has died on the plane. They were in deep trouble now. The good news was that John had less than an hour's flying experience, which was better than none at all. His first move was to contact Air Traffic Control, ATC, via the radio to explain the situation. Upon hearing John's account, ATC took immediate action, requesting the aircraft's identification number and pinpointing its location. An awkward moment then ensued as John's wife discovered Sam's lifeless body, causing panic to ripple through the cabin. In the ensuing chaos, Sam's body was accidentally pushed over, sending the plane into a rapid descent. Luckily, disaster was averted. After a great deal of effort, Sam's body was moved to the back of the aircraft, and John's wife took the pilot's seat. She took some comfort in the fact that her husband had some flying experience. John, however, pointed out that the aircraft he had flown yesterday was practically a toy compared to the one they were in now. They were aboard a large private jet, known as the King of the Sky, which was far more complex to operate, and he didn't even know what all the dials and gauges were for. Their conversation made it clear to ATC that there was essentially an unguided missile circling in the sky. Not wanting a repeat of 9/11, they quickly brought in a flight expert named Emma to communicate with John. Emma instructed John to switch off the autopilot, allowing the plane to land at the nearest possible location. She then directed him to maintain an altitude of 5,000 meters and gradually reduce speed in an attempt to lower the aircraft's altitude. When the altitude reading on the dashboard showed 3,500 meters, John was to turn west, aiming to guide the plane towards a nearby airport. But new issues arose. Firstly, the plane John was piloting was about to leave Emma's jurisdiction. Secondly, a storm was about to hit the airport they were intending to land at. Emma relayed this dire news to John and informed the ATC in Milesburg of their situation. Unfortunately, none of the Milesburg ATC staff were familiar with this type of aircraft. Luckily, an employee named Charlie had a friend who had previously flown this particular model. However, both were on forced leave from the air traffic control for violating regulations. The management initially had a poor impression of the two, but with no other options at hand, they had to let Charlie handle the situation. Charlie immediately contacted his friend Jack. Jack's father had been a pilot, and Jack had followed in his footsteps. However, after his father was tragically lost in an aviation accident, Jack realized the dangers of piloting and left the industry. Hearing from Charlie about someone in the same predicament, facing a life-threatening situation, reminded Jack of his own father. For that reason, Jack pledged to do his utmost to help John and his family. Jack was so committed that he managed to replicate the cockpit of the plane at home to guide John step by step on how to pilot the aircraft. With Jack's help, John was not as nervous as before. But then, another unexpected event occurred. The storm they had been warned about was approaching. The time Jack and the ATC staff spent devising a rescue plan had delayed things, and by the time Jack advised John to change the direction of the plane, the sky was already overcast. The situation became quite precarious. Given it was John's first time piloting such a complex aircraft and visibility at the airport was rapidly decreasing, ATC had to change the original plan, instructing John to execute an emergency landing as soon as he spotted the runway. An ATC operator named Tom then told John to lower the landing gear at an altitude of 1,500 meters, but Jack immediately intervened. Despite its size, the aircraft was relatively light. Opening the landing gear too early could cause the plane to sway uncontrollably. The landing gear should only be deployed at an appropriate altitude and speed. Jack then asked John to report the current altitude and speed. Once he had the data, Jack quickly calculated the optimum moment. All that remained was for John to steadily reach that point. Soon, there was good news. John could see the runway in the distance. Following this, the air traffic control told John to use his less than an hour of previous flying experience to align the plane with the runway and pull the control stick next to him to slow the plane down. John didn't dare to slack off, gradually decelerating the aircraft and steadily descending in altitude. When the aircraft reached an altitude of 800 meters, Jack immediately issued an instruction for John to lower the landing gear. As the landing gear slowly descended and the plane was about to land, a sudden crosswind blew the aircraft off course. At this moment, the aircraft's warning system prompted John to quickly ascend. With no other choice, John had to pull the plane back up. The first emergency landing attempt had failed. The storm had arrived, and the plane plunged into the clouds. The failure made John feel extremely guilty and desperate. As far as he could see, there were only endless dark clouds. Due to some unknown reason, the plane was now out of his control. He couldn't obtain any data on direction or speed. John realized at this point that there was no hope. But Jack once again offered assistance, telling John not to give up easily, that he was the only one who could save himself, and to stay strong and calm. It turned out that John couldn't control the plane because he had forgotten to retract the landing gear, causing the aircraft to be locked. Jack then told John to quickly retract the landing gear and try again. A calmer John managed to regain control of the aircraft, which burst through the clouds. The good news was that the blind flight had miraculously realigned the plane with the runway. The final step was to lower the landing gear, decelerate the plane, and land steadily. In the end, John focused and successfully landed the aircraft on the runway under Jack's guidance, saving his entire family. This emergency landing had many people holding their breaths. Had it failed, more than just his family would have been at risk. If the plane had crashed into a densely populated area, the consequences would have been disastrous. After this event, John became a celebrity. Many private aircraft companies invited him to test their planes. However, John declined all of these offers. His reasoning was simple: he was afraid that the media would sensationalize the event, package him as a hero, and encourage young people to try such dangerous feats. That would be like making a joke out of their lives. This incident did not make John afraid of flying. On the contrary, he enrolled in a flight training course and eventually became a qualified pilot. John's incredible experience tells us that in times of danger, it is only by staying calm and learning to save ourselves that we can escape from difficult situations. That's it for today's video. Don't forget to subscribe and comment if you like it. See you next time.